All right. So, what's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Louisiana. And today is January 22nd, 2025, about 2:30 p.m., where I'm at right now, coming on to read the seventh part, the seventh chapter of this book right here, White Women, Black Men, Illicit Sex in the 19th-Century South, written by Martha Hodes. This has been the book that we have been reading for the eighth part of our Booked React series, which you can find on the playlist on my channel. I encourage everybody to go check out all the other books that we've read and also check out the commentary that I've been giving in between the paragraphs or the chapters of these books. We've read some interesting books since I've started this series about 9 months ago. Afro pessimism was dope. Cyber racism was dope. Hoods was dope. Is the Turk a white man was dope. And this book especially is extremely dope. I find this book endlessly fascinating, endlessly entertaining, endlessly sad, and it's caused a lot of contemplation for me as we've continued to pour through the chapters. I think we only have about two chapters left, about chapter 7, which we'll read today, and chapter 8. I think there's also an epilogue as well. So we're going to be covering that over these next few live streams, possibly finishing up this book by the end of this week. Sorry it's been taking so long to finish this book. I've been traveling. As you see, I'm out here in Louisiana. We went to London, my wife and I. Went to New Orleans as well. So it's been a lot going on in my personal life, just like trying to manage running this channel and also just managing work, school, travel, family, friends, all that good stuff. But y'all bear with me, and I hope you enjoy the live streams. And you can always catch it on the playback as well. So this book you can pick up on Amazon for the humble price of only $28. Hardcover and $15.93 paperback. We're jumping into chapter 7 right here: politics, racial hierarchy, and illicit sex. And let's go into it. So actually, we're in part 2 of the book. Before I continue, we're in part 2 of the book where we're talking about during the Civil War and after the Civil War and how the dynamics between Black men and white women changed. So let's go. Black freedom brought a marked shift away from uneasy white toleration for sex between Black men and white women, and a move toward increasingly violent intolerance. In the antebellum South, the dividing line of Black slavery and white freedom had sufficiently, if imperfectly, sustained racial hierarchy. But with the demise of slavery, the maintenance of this hierarchy through other means became essential to white Southerners. Thus did the mixture of European and African ancestry come to be a much more serious taboo than even before. Whereas in the antebellum South, racial hierarchy had rested on the categories of Black and white, as well as on the categories of slavery and freedom. Now categories of color bore the entire burden of upholding the racial hierarchy. The new freedoms claimed by Black men and women were extremely troubling to whites, but it was the newfound autonomy of the men among the former slaves that carried the gravest danger, especially in the eyes of white patriarchs, because it was the men of the free Black population who now gained formal political power and began to achieve economic independence. It was they who had enormous potential to destroy the South's racial caste system. Intertwining these unfamiliar dangers, the possibility of blurring the categories of Black and white in a world without racial slavery, and the alarm of diminishing white supremacy, white people fastened on the taboo of sex between Black men and white women with newfound urgency. More concretely, the vanquished white patriarchs of the Old South feared the loss of control over sex between Blacks and whites. Under slavery, that control had permitted unchecked sex between white men and Black women. Indeed, Southern patriarchs would soon devise a rationale by which they could retain their power of sexual exploitation over Black women, while claiming that sex between Black men and white women would destroy the white race. After emancipation, expressions of white anxiety about sex between Black men and white women reached an unprecedented intensity. Americans are not squeamish as to jokes, but you must not jest in their society about the loves of Black men for white women, observed a British traveler to the South in 1867. Merely for paying a compliment where it thought he should not, a Negro would be flogged and tarred and hung. No punishment would be deemed brutal and fierce enough for such a sinner. The early years of Reconstruction marked the beginning of an era of terrorism in the American South. Those vanquished patriarchs and their sympathizers sympathizers replaced slavery with lethal violence in an effort to maintain control over the political, economic, and social activities of freed people, including control over the sexual agency of Black men and women. At the same time, following the social upheaval of wartime, they sought to reassert control over white women. So, if you've been following this book so far in the previous live streams, essentially the argument that Martha Hodes is making, based on the history, is that before the end of slavery, there was an uneasy toleration for sex between Black men and white women. Because on one hand, white men wanted to uphold their status as the domineers of the society, right? Uphold white male patriarchy. And essentially, after the end of slavery, they were trying to say, like, listen, now it's out of control. There are free men who are now competing with us for jobs and also for women as well. So, let's continue here. The intertwining of politics and sex in the minds of white Southerners is betrayed throughout testimony taken in the congressional investigation of the Ku Klux Klan in 1871. In these years, the Klan's actions represented the common concerns of whites who hoped to retain a racial hierarchy without the institution of slavery. In justifying violence, Klansmen and their supporters conflated the recently won political and economic authority of Black men with alleged sexual liaisons with white women. And although the Klan purported to protect, quote unquote, white womanhood, in fact, only certain white women were accorded that protection. The dialogues that ensued between the congressmen and the Black and white witnesses called before them differed markedly from the neighborhood conversations about sex between Black men and white women that had come to pass in antebellum communities. White neighbors no longer merely quarreled among themselves over the innocence or guilt of the transgressors. Now conflicts over sex between Black men and white women were played out violently by a region-wide white supremacist organization that directed terrorist tactics at entire Black communities. And the subject of sex between Black men and white women came to matter beyond community boundaries. Such liaisons were no longer solely local problems about illegitimate children, dishonored white husbands, or neighborhood identity. The subject now gained a place in wider ideological dialogues over sectional struggles. Sex between Black men and white women now mattered not only locally, but also nationally. At the same time, community responses to such liaisons more frequently came to pass outside the realm of law. So, terrorizing Black men. After the war, Southern states set out to renew laws that prohibited marriage across the color line. Although many freed people looked down on marriage to whites, most emphatically did not wish to see it criminalized, knowing that statutes would be enforced largely against Black men without protection for Black women compelled into concubinage. The annals of Reconstruction document both legal and extra-legal liaisons between Black men and white women, but the frequency of such liaisons remains difficult to determine. The record makes clear only that Black men and white women who wished to marry each other encountered both legal and social obstacles, including white violence. In Virginia in 1866, for example, a Black man failed to appear at his wedding to a white woman after he learned that local whites had made preparations to treat him to a coat of tar and cotton. When Jackson Haley and Susan Fly applied for a marriage license in Virginia in 1867, the clerk cited a law against such unnatural affiliations. Haley expressed indignation and invoked his civil rights to no avail. In Tennessee, in the late 1860s, a woman was warned by the police that she must not live with her husband because he is Black. The woman appealed to the Freedmen's Bureau by attempting to prove that she was in reality a colored woman. Although this may have been the case, it might also have been a tactic to ensure the couple's safety. An Alabama judge refused to issue a marriage license to the white Stella Cusack for marriage to a Black man in 1872, though the two were anxious to be joined in matrimony. The man was skeptical of help from the Freedmen's Bureau, in this case because of its character. In Mississippi in 1874, a freedman who was serving in the state legislature married a white woman. There was a good deal of talk, and the woman's father mentioned murder, though the Black neighbors threatened to burn the town and wreak vengeance on the people if a hair of that Negro's head was harmed. The couple fled, and when a Black man publicly named the white woman's family, rumors flew that the informers had advised other Black men to pick their white wives from the best families in this state. That's hilarious. That's funny. Okay. Anyway, sorry. Those who did marry could be convicted of fornication on the grounds that the union was legally void. Such was the fate of Aaron Green and Julia Atkinson, who wed in Alabama in the summer of 1876, only to find themselves arrested shortly thereafter. Atkinson served 2 years in prison when Robert Hoover determined that it was lawful for him to marry a white woman in Alabama. A minister married him to Betsy Litzy. Less than a year later, in 1876, the two were charged with living in a one-room house, even though they recognized each other as husband and wife. Hoover was convicted and then pardoned on the condition that he cease this very gross offense against morals and decorum. So, these are some very interesting stories because when we think about Reconstruction, basically the time after the Civil War, we don't think about these unions happening. I also find it very interesting that at the beginning, Martha Hodes points out that Black people at the time looked down on marriages from Black men to white women, right? And there are a number of reasons. We've covered this in previous live streams. My primary reason is that I think that the Black community at the time did not like to see that because they knew it would cause trouble. Basically, if they saw a Black man with a white woman at the time, they knew that that would incite the whites and have them in a fright, in a frenzy, ready to commit all sorts of atrocities. That's part of it, right? But also there was this overwhelming belief at the time that, the poorer white women who were the type to marry these Black men or cohabitate or sleep with these Black men were usually the poorer whites. And they were of bad moral standing, as Martha Hodes said before in previous chapters of this book. Let's continue. Some couples tried to avoid the dangers of legally sanctioned marriage altogether. In 1866, a discharged Union soldier named Ben Leslie, a very Black Negro, and a white woman named Molly Furlow were disturbed from their sweet slumbers by Mississippi authorities who sought proof of their sleeping in the same bed in order to make an arrest. One newspaper predicted that the sable lover and his white paramour will be assigned lodgings in the penitentiary for a term of years. Couples might also leave town, though not without consequences for their families. In Virginia in 1870, after a Black man eloped with his white employer's daughter, a shootout ensued between relatives of the runaways. That's hilarious. White women also continued to resort to desperate measures if they found themselves pregnant by a Black partner. When one newborn male mulatto infant, born seemingly alive, was found in 1866, a Virginia paper reported that an alarming number of Black infants were turning up dead. The editors made disparaging comments about Black mothers, but it is possible that white women were among the guilty. As one Alabama newspaper reported in 1867, a white woman was arrested by the police yesterday on the charge of strangling a colored infant, to which she gave birth last Thursday. Now that's just horrible. And we've heard we've heard this in previous chapters, right? Like before the end of slavery, there were many white women who got pregnant and they would basically kill the babies. They would commit infanticide. And some people would try to protect the babies by making sure a crowd of people would be there when that baby was born, knowing that the father was a Black man, to make sure that the mother or the family of that woman didn't kill that baby, at least. And that's just horrible, man. Infanticide is wrong. There's like a number of crimes that are just unforgivable. Infanticide is one of them. But that's not talking about abortion. I know somebody's going to take that out of context. But let's continue here. As in antebellum cases, the motivations of Reconstruction-era transgressors remain elusive, with few defiant voices on record. Freedman Richard Hill recounted a white woman saying that if she felt disposed to fall in love with or marry a Black man, it was nobody's business but hers. Countering the views of many Black leaders, Hill added that if the colored race get all their rights, and particularly their equal rights before the law, such a union would not hurt the nation or trouble the nation. A letter to the Freedmen's Bureau in 1867 more directly reveals the sentiments of a transgressing white woman. Carrie and Sandy Hall had been married by an ordained minister in Georgia, but lived apart while Sandy labored on an Alabama plantation. Carrie Hall described how a number of years ago she became very much attached to this colored gentleman, and my whole desire was to choose him for my companion and husband through life, for he was the only one on earth that I desired for a husband. If not for whites who eventually threatened them, Carrie was certain they would be one of the happiest couples in the world. Carrie took responsibility for charging Sandy to marry her, perhaps in an effort to protect her Black husband, and vowed to stand up in any crowd to save him. Still, such statements are rare, and the enigmas of choice and volition deepen with the increasing threat and reality of deadly white violence resulting from sex between Black men and white women. For along the possibility of arrest and prosecution, there now came a form of terrorism that included the maiming and murder both of Black men and, to a lesser extent, of white women. In his 1867 diatribe on white supremacy, the venomously racist non-slaveholder of the antebellum South, Hinton Rowan Helper, denounced Black suffrage, citizenship, and education, pronouncing, "If the Negro marries an outcast white woman, of course, no white woman who is an outcast of the worst possible sort would ever think of marrying him. Both he and she ought to be hung 3 minutes after the conclusion of the ceremony or as soon thereafter as the necessary preparations could be made." Horrific stuff, nasty stuff here. When I hear this story about Carrie and Sandy, right? Carrie sounds like she really loved that guy, right? And once again, in this book, it's kind of sad that we don't hear the voices of Black men. We don't hear the stories of the Black male slaves and what they experienced, whether they thought that the relationship they were having with this white woman was consensual, whether it was a type of sexual abuse or rape. Some people might say their voices aren't recorded because, number one, a lot of them weren't allowed to learn how to read and write, and their testimonies were not allowed in court. So I think, reading this book, while we're getting a lot of accounts of these, we're not hearing the Black side of this or the Black male side of this. And it's important for all Black men out there to record their stories, write your stories, tell your stories so that people know it for posterity. That's why I do this channel, so that my voice is not lost in the sauce of time as it passes on. Let's continue here. White Southerners conflated the political rights of Black men with sexual transgressions in justifying the Klan-led violence that terrorized freed people between 1868 and 1871, coinciding with the organization of the Republican Party in the defeated Confederacy. Although the Ku Klux Klan victimized white supporters of freed people's rights, the greatest violence was reserved for Black men and women. 6 young returning Confederate officers had organized the Ku Klux Klan as a secret social club in Pulaski, Tennessee in 1865 or 1866. The name probably derived from kuklos, Greek for circle. The Klan's activities soon encompassed the harassment of freed people, and by 1868, branches had been established at least for some time in all Southern states, occasionally under other names that denoted secrecy, white supremacy, or both. Although patterns varied across the South and are difficult to schematize with precision, the Ku Klux Klan gathered where Black or Republican populations approximated white or Democratic populations. And it was generally most active in areas of greatest economic equality between Blacks and whites. Klan membership included all classes of white Southerners, but leaders were largely drawn from among the more well-to-do. The former Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest became the Klan's first leader, or Grand Wizard, and state leaders included lawyers, businessmen, journalists, former governors, and future U.S. senators among their ranks. I would not be surprised if the Ku Klux Klan still operates at those high levels of positions in society, just behind closed doors, or maybe under a different name. I truly believe, and this is a little bit of conspiracy, Simon, coming out. I don't do conspiracy theories. I don't believe 9/11 was an inside job. I don't believe, JFK is still alive or Tupac is in Cuba. But my one conspiracy theory that I hold on to is that there are a lot of powerful white men in power who are part of secret societies that are explicitly anti-Black and racist. And when we have Elon Musk doing Nazi salutes in front of the whole world, I think there's some credence to my idea. But that's my only conspiracy that I believe in. But yeah, let's continue here. Although the Klan lacked central control, its methods were consistent. The majority report filed by Congress in 1871 concluded that we see from Maryland to Mexico the same general spirit of spite against the freedman and determination to keep him down and use his labor without compensation. Tactics ranged from the destruction of property to whipping, torture, castration, rape, and murder. Because Klan participants early on realized the power of operating underground, there were few public signs of their existence. Attacks usually took place in isolated rural areas at night. Attackers disguised themselves and might number about a dozen, though mobs of 50 or 100 also launched raids. Klansmen were motivated by the goal of white supremacy, manifested most concretely in white control of formal politics. Members claimed to guard against insurrection by freed people, deter crime, punish corruption, and protect against lawlessness. White Southerners who disagreed with Klan tactics largely remained silent. Black men and women, given the threat they faced, showed tremendous resistance, perhaps most especially in the act of testifying before Congress. I have to say this, white Southerners who disagreed with Klan tactics largely remained silent. That is still a major issue now. We have blatant white supremacists out here. We have blatant people that show disregard for other human life. And a lot of the people who have the proximity to those people remain silent. A lot of white folks know they got a racist ass uncle. A lot of white folks know that Trump and his acolytes are explicitly racist, and yet and still they don't say anything about it because it doesn't bother them. It doesn't bother them. And that's one of the big problems. We need white allies. We need white allies. But Black people in general have to also realize that generally that goes against human nature. People generally don't want conflict. People generally just want peace, and they're just going to be fine going along to get along. Continuing here. In the spring of 1871, a joint committee of Congress embarked on an investigation of Klan violence. Republicans, the party of anti-slavery Northerners and of virtually all Blacks in the Reconstruction South, outnumbered Democrats, the majority party of white Southerners. I have to say this too before I continue. I know there are a lot of people out there who say the Democrats started the KKK. The Democrats are the original racists and all this stuff. Let's all remember, these are white Southerners. Let's remember, white Southerners are the problem. It's not the Democrats. It's not the Republicans. It's white Southerners generally that are the most regressive, reactionary, fascistic people in America. All right, let's continue here. So, for months, testimony was taken in Washington, D.C., as well as in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. The committee discovered that those in greatest danger of attack were Black men and their families, who defied white efforts to retain racial hierarchy. This included men who were voters, political leaders, labor activists, those who displayed economic independence, and those who crossed boundaries of the color line in acts that ranged from talking back to sex with a white woman. Among whites, Klansmen targeted Republican officers, teachers of the freed people, Northerners or carpetbaggers, and white Southern Republicans or scalawags. Congressmen listened to both victims and perpetrators, though Klansmen and their sympathizers were evasive and claimed ignorance, aided immeasurably by the underground nature of the organization. When asked about an organization of disguised harassers in his Mississippi community, for example, one white witness said, "If there is, I don't know it and never heard of it, sir. That is, to know it to be a fact or ever to have heard of it being a fact." A white Alabama man likewise averred, "I will state my theory about the Ku Klux Klan organization. Of course, I know no Ku Klux. I never consciously saw one in my life." So this is interesting. This is very interesting. People back then, when the Ku Klux Klan was wildly active, burning crosses, lynching Black people, threatening Republicans who were teaching Black people how to read and stuff like that, white folks at the time were like, "I don't know a Ku Klux Klan. I've never seen one. I don't think they even exist." Sounds very reminiscent of today, doesn't it? History doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. You ask a white person today, "Hey, does white supremacy exist? Have you ever seen a white supremacist?" They're like, "I don't even think it exists. It ain't real. There's no way it's real. Racism is something of the past." And back then, people were saying, the Ku Klux Klan must not be real. I've never seen one. Okay, let's continue here. The victims, Black and whites, male and female, had much more to say, though they could not always speak forthrightly. Notably, stories about Black men and white women were often told by white witnesses, some of whom sympathized with Klan victims and some of whom did not. Because both sympathizers and enemies commonly relayed secondhand accounts, it is impossible to separate fabricated accusations from observed transgressions and to distinguish false admissions given under threats or torture from truthful confessions. Yet what comes through consistently in the testimony is how white anxiety over sexual liaisons between Black men and white women was linked to both party politics and successful crops. Indeed, Black victims and witnesses alike made that connection, whether cautiously or candidly, in their testimony before Congress. Two narratives of Klan violence illustrate this link. Jordan Ware, a freedman whom the Klan assaulted and later murdered in Georgia's Upper Piedmont, told the white postmaster of his town that the first aggression against him was on account of his politics and an effort by whites to get possession of his place. Ware, who tended about 30 acres of land and worked for a local white woman, was fixed very comfortably. His attackers told him to leave the area and not vote the radical ticket anymore. Even though Ware moved away, disguised Klansmen beat him to death the next time they found him. Sad. Absolutely sad. Sorry. The sympathetic postmaster agreed that Ware was a leading man, a prominent man among the colored people. An unsympathetic white farmer described him as a big, mighty, forward, pompous Negro, adding, "I think they whipped him more for that than anything else. He pushed about among white men too much." Moreover, a white lawyer thought Klansmen had attacked Ware because they believed he had made some insulting remark to a white lady. Although lady signified a well-to-do white woman, whites may also have described any alleged victim of a Black man as such, without regard to her actual class standing, in an effort to justify violence. By the way, for all the people out there who say voting isn't important, literally our ancestors were killed for it. I know that's so cliche, but remember Jordan Ware, man, a Black man who was just trying to live his life, getting involved in politics, just tried to vote and was killed by the Klan for it. And there's plenty of other stories. Continuing here. When the investigating committee pressed on, let me understand the character of the allegations against him. You say that he made some insulting proposal to a white lady? The lawyer answered, oh no, that he had just made some insulting remark. He remarked, "How ye, sis," or something of that kind, as the young lady passed down the road. A white blacksmith had also heard that Ware had some slight talk to a gentleman's wife, a white lady, and called her sis or wife or something of that sort, one day when he was passing along the road. Again, the phrase gentleman's wife marked the woman's status. In the most incriminating version, of a white editor heard that Ware had made the lecherous advances to the lady. He called her wife and thrust out his tongue at her. The lady ran away very much frightened. Because such propositions were of a grossly indecent character, this man felt Ware's death was justified, for the lady was spared the mortification and shame of appearing in court in connection with the cause that the delicacy of any lady would shrink from in terror. The development of an increasingly rigid and violent system of deference and stricter rules about interaction between Black men and elite white women is apparent in the ordeal of Jordan Ware. And in Jordan Ware's murder, it is clear that in combination with political and economic independence, any remark toward a white woman deserving of the title lady, even a daytime greeting, could be construed by whites as a threatening sexual overture deserving of death. The ordeal of Henry Lowther, a husband, father, and freedman in Georgia's Cotton Belt, also reveals how white anger about the political and economic power of Black men merged with accusations of sexual misconduct toward elite white women. Like Jordan Ware, Henry Lowther had done well for himself. 20 disguised Klansmen came to the Lowther home on horseback one night, but Lowther managed to elude them and got up a company of Black men to serve as protection. They said I had taken too great a stand against them in the Republican Party, Lowther recalled. I worked for my money and carried on a shop. They all got broke and did not pay me, and I sued them, Lowther concluded. They have been working at me ever since I have been free. I had too much money. Lowther was jailed on charges of conspiring to murder another Black man and was denied trial. A white man who came to warn Lowther and of trouble asked him whether he would be willing to give up your stones to save your life, indicating castration. As Lowther remembered the scene, almost 200 Klansmen arrived in the middle of the night, and 20 of them carried him away to a swamp. The moon was shining bright, and I could see them, Lowther testified. All the men were Democrats. Before he was blindfolded, Lowther recognized one of his attackers as a man I thought a heap of, a nice young man, whom Lowther suspected was forced to participate. They asked me whether I preferred to be altered or to be killed. I said I preferred to be altered. After laying me down and getting through, they said, "Now, as soon as you can get to a doctor, go to one." I asked how long it would take to get well, and they said 5 or 6 weeks. I was naked and bleeding very much. Dressed again, yet nearly frozen, and sure he would die from loss of blood, Lowther dragged himself to a white doctor's home, but no one came to the door. Lowther believed the doctor had participated in the attack. A number of black women came to see me, Lowther said, and told me that the blood was all over town. Absolutely horrible story, man. So this sounds just like Rosewood or Black Wall Street, right? Black man or a black community gains a lot of money, gains a lot of clout in the community. The white folks get jealous. In Mr. Lowther's case, he owned a shop and he was lending out food and supplies to the white folks on credit. They didn't want to pay him back, so they decided to cut off his penis, or in this case, castrate him. And so they castrate him, and then they're kind of polite. I've never heard this story before. These Klansmen are actually kind of polite. Lowther asked them, "How long will it take for my penis to get fixed again?" And they say 5 to 6 weeks, just go to the doctor. He goes to the doctor. And the doctor's not there because the doctor was probably a Klansman too. And so the black women are trying to like help him get his penis straight, but I don't know. What a horrible story. Anyway, continuing here. The congressman who questioned Lowther also understood the interchangeable nature of political and sexual offenses. Did Lowther know the reason for the attack? Any offense against the law, any breach of the peace, any violence, any insult to any white woman, or anything of that kind? Asked one. No, sir, I never insulted any white woman, Lowther answered. They said I was getting to have too much influence in the Republican Party there. When pressed, however, Lowther relayed that his attackers said, I was going to see a white lady. Again, the class designation mattered, but pointed out that the charge was untrue. The woman in question had hired Lowther to tend her land, but this charge had not been made the first time Klansmen had come for him. According to a white Republican judge, once Lowther had been assured that he would not be compelled to criminate himself before the court, he admitted that he had had connection with that white woman. This white man expressed consternation over any political charges. I do not believe, and I cannot believe, he said, that the maltreatment of Henry Lowther was owing to his politics. Yet in the castration of Henry Lowther and in other cases in the early years of Reconstruction, white Southerners invoked charges of illicit sexual behavior toward or with white women deemed respectable in white eyes, together with charges of Republican activism or successful crops, that is, of political and economic independence. I think this story right here, the story of Lowther, sort of highlights that, both sides of the political aisle, the Democrats and Republicans, in this time, the Republicans were the left and the Democrats were the right. It shows that there really are no allies for black people because the Republican judge, instead of talking about how, they really bullied and castrated this black man because he was a leftist, in this case, a Republican, right? He's now saying, well, it probably was because this black man told me that he had sex with a white woman, right? And showing, sort of giving in to that racist caricature of black men just lusting after white women and stuff like that. Of course, the Klan is going to give any sort of excuse to murder or castrate a black man in this case. But I find it very disturbing that, in the American political system, there really sort of is no party, right or left, Democrat or Republican, that really is out for the interests of black people. It's just which one is less harmful to black people. Kind of sad, but let's continue here. So Henry Lowther's was not the only case of sexual torture by the Klan. When a black man and a white woman were accused of cohabitation in Georgia, a doctor recalled that the colored man was taken out into the woods, a hole dug in the ground and a block buried in it, and his penis taken out and a nail driven through it into the block. That a large butcher or cheese knife, as they call it, very sharp, was laid down by him, and the light wood piled around him and set on fire. The knife was put there so that he could cut it off and get away, or stay there and burn up. That's torture. Oh my God, that's sick. Oh, I feel sick. Oh my God. Oh, that's absolutely sick. I need a water break on that. Basically, they tied his penis to like a block of wood, and he had the choice to either cut off his penis or sit there and burn like his whole body because they set the wood on fire, essentially. Absolutely sick and twisted. Oh, God. Okay. The man chose to escape. Oh, Jesus Christ. The man chose to escape. Klansmen could in fact resort to sexual mutilation for any act that struck them as demonstrating too much authority, whether or not they tacked on an accusation of sexual misconduct. In North Carolina, for example, a black man named Nathan Trollinger was made to mutilate his own private parts with his pocket knife after a severe whipping. The cause was a labor dispute. An investigator for the Department of Justice reported the cases of two black ministers in Georgia. One of the men was taken just as he finished preaching one night, and his privates were cut smooth off. The other was strapped across a log and his stones whipped out with a buggy trace. I don't even want to know what a buggy trace is, but this is, can y'all just burn crosses instead? I mean, I could imagine the Klan doing these sorts of things, cutting off black men's penises and all that sort of stuff, but I didn't know. I mean, this is why we read these books, right? To find out about our history and learn. But man, that's tough. Acti says, it's making me sick too. What type of human being can do such type of torture? I don't know. The guy from Saw. What's his name? Saw. The guy from Saw. This sounds like something from Martyrs. Absolutely horrible. I don't want to know what a buggy trace is, but so anyway, the victims of these crimes were Republicans and men of influence, the investigator wrote. And on that account, undoubtedly, they were thus treated by disguised men known as the Clucks. All right. All right. Acti said she retracted that message. Why are these messages getting retracted? Why y'all deleting messages? Leave y'all chats up. I don't have to delete your chat. Anyway, it is significant that those who sympathize with Henry Lowther's tormentors did not characterize his alleged bad behavior toward the white woman as rape. A black man could be tortured and murdered in the Reconstruction South, even if a liaison with a white woman was acknowledged by whites to be consensual, as was the case for the Georgia man accused of cohabitation and mutilated with a butcher knife. In Tennessee in 1869, Klansmen abducted a black man from the sheriff's custody, lifted him off his feet with a rope around his neck, doused him with turpentine, and set him afire, and finally shot him to death as they let him run. The man had recently eloped with the white daughter of his employer. A consensual liaison could alternatively result in a legal death sentence. A black man named George Alford, returning from the army to his old neighborhood in Kentucky, ended up convicted of killing his former slave master. Evidence pointed to a consensual liaison with the white man's wife as the cause of the murder. Had the white woman permitted this bloody-handed wretch to occupy her husband's bed? Queried one reporter. Alford remained silent on the question and was executed in 1874. In 1876, in North Carolina, one judge reasoned that a jury could infer the intention of rape from the fact that a black man had run after a white woman who accused him of attempted rape, considering that he was a Negro, and considering the repugnance of a white woman to the embraces of a Negro. Going now to the comments. Acti says, I really wish the group who suffer from a common enemy, the white man, can work together, but fools have to ruin it all for us. Okay, Acti, turn it up. Acti X. Martin Luther Shaheen. Okay. Acti in the comments, turn it up. Okay. Anyway, so the black man was found guilty. Reconstruction judges also alluded to lynching when they wrote opinions in rape cases involving black men and white women. When a rape conviction was upheld in Georgia in 1873, one judge opined that the man had no right to complain where both the law and an outraged family spare his life. Likewise, when a death sentence was upheld in a Texas rape case in 1876, the judges closed their opinion with smug congratulations for white neighbors who refrained from lynching, noting the people's spirit of tolerance in the face of this vile outrage. So this is the thing, man. Black men getting killed, executed by the state, which should be more reasons why today we as black folks should not be supporting the death penalty at all. But yeah, the white people then were saying, like, congratulations to the white folks for not lynching. They show a level of restraint and compassion and civilization by not, basically mob murdering this innocent black man. Acti says the system works too well. All right, Acti came to America and she has now become the new Black Panther leader. Acti has come to America and she is like turned up. I like that. I like that. Anyway, let's continue here. All right, Brian C says hello. Shout out to Brian C joining the live stream chat. Let me know what you think of this book so far, and let me know how you're doing, young man. Continuing here. Whites did not uniformly level rape accusations at black men in the early years of Reconstruction, though they began to put forth the idea that such a crime was becoming more frequent. A white man from Georgia, for example, told the Congressional Committee that the rape of a white woman by black men was vastly more frequent now than during slavery, though he could not cite any actual cases. At the same time, an accusation that concerned the rape of a respectable white woman could lead to lynching. Charles Clark of Georgia's Cotton Belt, for example, was charged with raping the white daughter of a Methodist preacher and jailed by Klansmen. The judge found the evidence insufficient for conviction, and Clark was returned to jail, guarded by black men, supposedly pending further investigation. A black man overheard that Clark never would come out of that jail alive, and indeed, 36 undisguised Klansmen shot him dead. Undisguised, broad daylight, bareface, walked in there, murdered a black man. Similarly, a white businessman in Georgia described a case in which a black man was accused of raping a 16-year-old white girl. They caught that Negro, tied him to a stake, and burned him in the daytime before, I suppose, 1,000 people. The man recalled they never had any trial or proof or anything of that sort, and they never gave the name of this girl so far as I ever knew. The respective murder and torture of Jordan Ware and Henry Lowther illuminate the connections between newly won political and economic standing for black men, and the taboo of sex with white women. Political power, economic success, and sex with a white woman, all such actions on the part of a black man confounded the lines of racial categories in a South without slavery, and therefore became unforgivable transgressions in the eyes of whites. Without the legal status of slavery and freedom as a dividing line, white Southerners had to rely on the fickle categories of black and white to define white supremacy. The color line, therefore, had to be fixed in two ways. It had to be established first by stricter racial definitions, which would come to fruition in the late 19th century with the codified one-drop rule. It also had to be established by distinct political, economic, and social castes for white men and black men, a task that required constant vigilance on the part of white people in order to ensure that no black man crossed over into the territory of political power, economic independence, or social authority. When black men did cross those lines, as they did during Reconstruction, white men reacted with threats and acts of lethal violence. Okay, so once again, we're getting to the part of the story. We're in the middle of this book, close to the end, where it's starting to become what we know of history, right? Black men accused of rape with a white woman, even if there's no white woman in the 100-mile radius, black man gets murdered, right? Now we're getting to that part of the story. So men like Jordan Ware, Henry Lowther, and the other victims of Klan violence were nobody's property. They did not merit white protection from mutilation or murder. In part due to their subjugated status as slaves, Abraham Peppinger's Jim and John Richardson's Edmund, along with numerous others, had not suffered castration or death for their liaisons with white women in the antebellum South. In the post-emancipation South, by contrast, no white person needed to be compensated, and no one needed to fight for their pardon of a transgressing black man. As one white observer from the North noted just after the war, the pecuniary value which the individual Negro formerly represented having disappeared, the maiming and killing of colored men seems to be looked upon by many as one of those venial offenses which must be forgiven to the outraged feelings of a wronged and robbed people. Black anti-lynching activists would in fact make the same point later in the century. In the antebellum South, neither had free black men like James Nunes suffered mutilation or murder for their liaisons with white women. But with emancipation and the demise of racial slavery, free black men, now exercising political power and demonstrating economic self-sufficiency, were infinitely more dangerous to whites who sought to maintain racial supremacy. So basically, what she's trying to say here is that, ironically, before the end of slavery, black men who had sex with white women were sort of like tolerated. Like black men weren't getting castrated or murdered or sent to jail forever for even having sex, literally getting caught in the bed with white women. For the previous live streams, we read countless stories of that. Black women, black men knocking up the master's wife, literally. black men knocking up master's wife, and the black man continues to work out in the fields, right? After the end of slavery, white folks feel so incensed that they lost us as property that they just lash out. And that's how we get the Klan and racial terrorism. So, in tandem with political and economic strength so infuriating to white people, freedmen who consorted with white women who were accused of such behavior became transgressive in a way that they had never been under the oppressive regime of slavery. Less than a year after the Civil War, a Virginia newspaper issued a warning to a girl from a well-to-do white family who had gone horseback riding with a black man as her guard. Under our ancient institutions, there would have been no impropriety in this, the white editors explained, as the distinction between the two races was then too marked to admit of any misconstruction. But now, with the lurking shadow of racial equality, they advised, we think it would be more appropriate for ladies to refrain from equestrian exercise unless they can obtain an escort of their own color. And now, as part of their relentless resolve to preserve the racial hierarchy, Klansmen and their supporters also subjected transgressing white women to violence heretofore unknown. Interesting. So basically what he's trying to say is, like, at the time, you know, before the end of slavery, a white woman and a black man could go riding off on a horse somewhere romantically through the rolling hills of northern Georgia. After the end of slavery, they're saying, like, that is inappropriate now, which is so ironic. There were more intimate, it seems like there were more intimate relationships, interpersonal intimate relationships between the races during slavery than there was afterwards. There were more intimate interpersonal relationships between the races, these social constructs, before the end of slavery than afterwards. Let's continue here. Protecting and abusing white women. Some white Southerners blamed the Civil War for liaisons between black men and white women. A white man in Virginia spoke with disgust about a white woman who had a N-word husband and associated with black people, and mistakenly believed that such an event could never have occurred under slavery. Other white Americans misguidedly believed that a liaison between a black man and a white woman was too unspeakably horrid and absurd ever to come to pass in the Reconstruction South. J.H. Van Every, a pro-slavery New York physician who was widely read and admired among white Southerners, wrote of the South in 1868 that such a thing is altogether impossible, for the woman would not alone be driven from the society of her own race, but she would not be permitted, if known, to live even among Negroes. Although the Reconstruction-era Klan excluded women from membership, scattered evidence indicates that white women took part in racial violence or Klan activities. In Kentucky, for example, a white woman stabbed a black woman in the neck for giving water to a Union soldier. More commonly, wives, mothers, sisters, and daughters sewed Klansmen's costumes, either voluntarily or on orders. As North Carolina Klansman John Long said of the costumes, "We got our wives to make them." One white man felt sure that the Klan had its strongest support among the women of the country, offering as evidence the fact that these women manufactured the disguises worn by the Klan, which are in some instances quite fancifully trimmed. Other women lent their own clothing as disguises. One Georgia victim who had recognized an attacker said, "Wilson had on his wife's dress. My wife is well acquainted with them, and she knew that he had on his wife's dress." At least some white women urged their husbands not to join in. Long's wife, for one, pleaded with him not to go out on a raid, and a few expressed their apprehensions more directly. A white woman in North Carolina said, "The Yankees were gentlemen compared to these Ku Klux." And a white woman in Alabama was whipped and thrown into a ravine and later died of the injuries for informing on Klansmen. So it's not just black men that are getting the, brutality of white racial terrorism in the post-slavery South. White women are getting the whip too. Unfortunately, this is not something to laugh at. It's not something to laugh at. But once again, I'm learning history because it's like you don't imagine that as well. You imagine that the black man and the white woman caught in, the shack somewhere after the end of slavery, that black man's getting killed and that white woman's getting reprimanded. But you wouldn't think that she would get murdered too. Let's find out. So, Albion Tourgi, the white northerner who served as a judge in North Carolina during Reconstruction, observed that Klan victims were either black men, white men in political sympathy with black men, or renegade Klan or Democratic Party men. What he omitted were the women, both black and white. As a male-only organization, one of the Klan's stated purposes was that females, friends, widows, and their households shall ever be special objects of our regard and protection. The Klan's intentions to protect women never applied to black women, and as part of their violent rampages, Klansmen routinely assaulted and raped black women. Not all white women merited protection either. As in the antebellum South, dominant ideology about the purity of white women continued to rest on class standing. As in the case of Jordan Ware, Klansmen took offense when a black man acted in a manner they judged even mildly insulting to a white woman deemed worthy of the title lady. As for the definition of insulting behavior, one white northerner observed that a black man was called insolent whenever his conduct varies in any manner from what a southern man was accustomed to when slavery existed. Going now to the comments right here. All right, Juanita Mosby says, hi, I'm a black woman. Am I allowed here? Can we talk about something else? Well, Juanita, thank you for joining. I appreciate you being here, Juanita. We're reading a book right now. We're reading the book White Women, Black Men, Illicit Sex in the 19th-Century South by Martha Hodes, a very famous historian. You can find this book on Amazon as well. We're not talking about anything else. We are reading the text and we're reacting to it, and you're welcome to react as well and give us your comments on what you think about the book. There are 6 other live streams previous to this one. We're on chapter 7 of the book, and you're welcome to give commentary. Let's continue here. In the case of Sandy Sellers in North Carolina, 20 or so disguised Klansmen entered his home, wrenched him out of bed, tore off his shirt, tied his hands around a tree, whipped him, and then rubbed his lacerated back with a rough stick. One raid participant claimed that it was for cursing a white woman whose cattle had trampled on the corn of the white man for whom Sellers sharecropped. But the Klansman soon changed his story to say that they had beat Sellers because he made an insulting proposal to a white woman, that he wanted to sleep with her, and that when she would not consent, he complained of her hogs getting into his wheat. One of the attackers later claimed to remember only that we told him never to talk about white ladies the way he had, or something about some stock was said. Sellers maintained that he had not made any propositions, but he was forced to promise not to order white women around. Although the class status of this woman was not specified, she probably belonged to a family that commanded social authority for poor white women who were not often regarded as capable of being insulted. Indeed, in numerous other narratives, the allegedly victimized white women were ladies, quote unquote. A Klan attack on a black man in Georgia was attributed to the fact that he had used his saucy expression to a white lady. Another white Georgian said that freedmen were abusive to ladies. In Mississippi, a black man was assaulted for using some improper language in regard to some white ladies of the neighborhood. In North Carolina, one black man was hanged because he was a great terror to white ladies and impudent to them. Another because he made a bad proposition to a very respectable young lady. Whites also consistently invoked the term lady when a black man was accused of raping a white woman. In Virginia in 1869, for example, Jesse Edwards was hanged for the alleged rape and murder of Miss Susan Height, a respectable young lady. White people in North Carolina severely beat a black man for allegedly assaulting a respectable young lady, and as Grand Wizard Nathan Forrest put it, ladies were being ravished by some of these Negroes who were tried and put in the penitentiary, but were turned out in a few days afterward. When pressed for details, Forrest admitted only hearsay and claimed lack of recollection. Like black women, white women of the lower classes, and especially those who defied the rules of patriarchy, could not count on ideology about female purity to absolve them of alleged illicit sexual activity. Poor white women whom Klansmen and their sympathizers judged to be lacking in virtue were subject to abuse that ranged from insulting language to rape. After Georgia Klansmen shot a black man living in adultery with a white woman, they strapped the woman across a log and whipped her so severely that she could not sit up yesterday. Absolutely crazy. Klansmen also sexually mutilated white women who lived outside the boundaries of sexual propriety. In the Georgia case of cohabitation, in which the black man was castrated with a butcher knife, a witness recounted, perhaps exaggerating, perhaps not, that Klansmen took the woman, laid her down on the ground, then cut a slit on each side of her orifice, on her vagina, put a large padlock in it, locked it up, and threw away the key, and then turned her loose. Oh, so basically, they cut two holes in her vagina, put a chain lock in it, like a bike lock or something like that, and then threw away the key after they locked it, and then told her to go along now. Absolutely horrible. Oh, that's the worst torture. That's the worst torture. This is literally torture. Acti says, yes, I'm even pain. I'm even in pain right now. Jesus, that's horrible. I couldn't even think of that, man. And I couldn't even think of something that horrible. Oh, okay. Acti says her pee hurts. Man, mine too. Mine too. That's horrible. Okay, so anyway, in North Carolina, a white girl with a bad reputation was assaulted by the Klan. One witness testified that they took her clothes off, whipped her very severely, and then lit a match and burned her hair off and made her cut off herself the part that they did not burn off with the match. So there's a lot of innuendo there, but I'm assuming they made her do like some genital mutilation with a knife to herself. So they lit her hair on fire and then told her to cut her own vagina. Absolutely sick. See, the Ku Klux Klan is just like any other right-wing party today, any other fascist party today that says we're here to protect our women, our cherished, noble women from these savages who are coming to ravage them. But yet and still, those right-wing people hate women even more than anybody else, right? They hate their own women. We see that right now with the right-wing reactionary Republican Party that's doing everything right now to make it harder for women to have autonomy over their own bodies. They would rather have white women die and dump their babies in ditches than to give them rights to, sexual freedom and reproductive rights. So it's no different with the Klan back then, right? Torturing white women just for, jumping up and down on soul pole. Anyway, sometimes black men and white women were simply accorded the same treatment. In Georgia, angry whites burned 3 colored men and 3 white women alive because they lived together. Okay, that's a wild story. So three black guys and 3 white girls were just living in the house, getting it on, chilling together, and the Klan burst in there and killed everybody. Wow. I thought, you would imagine they would let the white girls go. But nope. So the North Carolina case of Mary Gappins reveals white men's casual attitude toward white women whom they suspected of moral depravity. Gappin's house, which she denied operating as a brothel, had been torn down by 7 disguised Klansmen. When her white Southern interrogators asked how many colored children she had, Gappins admitted to 1. The men laughed and then laughed again when she explained, "It was a darky who took me in some way and got me where I could not help myself," leaving the question of rape ambiguous. Markings in the transcript indicating laughter make clear that no white man was outraged by the possibility of a white woman forced into sex with a black man if that white woman ran a whorehouse and had a black child. Gappins added, perhaps hastily, "I have as much objection to white folks and darkies mixing up as anybody." Very interesting. So this white woman had a black child and still was racist. Still was racist. This white woman had a black child, alluded to the idea that maybe her child was born from rape. And when the Klan was there, she said, I don't like darkies either. So a part of me feels like maybe she was intimidated. So she was saying that to get out of the way of the Klan. Maybe they had guns pointed at her and stuff like that. But still, goes to show a lot. It goes to show a lot without even saying a lot. Let's continue here. The reputations of white women were continually assessed by white Southerners in the Klan testimony, with the Congressional Committee participating in such dialogues. Questioning a witness about the lynching of Charles Clark for alleged rape, for example, the committee asked, was she a respectable girl? Voluntary association with a black man immediately implied depravity for a white woman. The white farmer who testified about the murder of Jordan Ware had heard that Klansmen had been on the lookout for a sort of low character of a white woman. who harbored about his house. When asked by the committee if she were a low-down white woman, the farmer replied, "Yes, sir, one of the meanest you ever saw in the world, so mean that she ought to be hung." This apparently was not the lady whom Ware supposedly insulted. Similarly, when questioned about the reputation of the white woman with whom Henry Lowther allegedly had sex, a white judge thought she was one of those low-down tramps which are scattered about the country, not a lady after all. Both of these white women had significantly been honored with the designation of lady when painted by white people as the victims of black men. Comparable descriptions of bad white women abound. In another Georgia case, a white man testified that Klansmen beat a black man who had asked a white woman to copulate with him. The woman had refused, and when questioned as to her character, the witness answered, "I suppose it was fair, because if she had been a common whore or strumpet, I do not suppose that they would have paid any attention to it." When a black Georgian accused of attempting to rape a white woman was left alone, the committee asked a white witness, what was there about that case that mitigated it? Was the woman of bad character? The man answered that the woman's character was good, but that she was a woman of low position in society, and such a proceeding would not have been so great a shock to her, perhaps as to one of higher refinement, thus indicating the presumed equation between poor women and a base lack of sensitivity. A white witness who told the committee about a black Alabamian shot by Klansmen because his wife was white added, "I suppose she was a low woman. Poor white women were also excluded from those who supposedly lived in fear of black men." Speaking of such fears, Grand Wizard Forrest remarked that, "In the poor neighborhoods, I do not think that insecurity was felt." Whites continued as well to recognize the possibility of sexual coercion by white women. One white witness, in whom Henry Lowther confided, relayed that the white woman in question had followed Lowther into the woods and asked for sex. The witness said, the inference I drew was that she was a very bad, abandoned character, from the circumstance that she voluntarily followed him into the woods, and, as I suppose from his language, solicited him to have intercourse with her. Black men and women use the same language when they described white women to the congressional investigators, though with less rigid distinctions of class and status. Henry Lowther called the white woman with whom he was accused of fraternizing a lady in one sentence and a bad character in the next. In the murder of freedman John Whathall in Georgia, a black neighbor, Maria Carter, identified 4 white sisters with whom she said Whathall had sex before his marriage. When the committee inquired whether these were women of bad character, Carter replied, "Yes, sir, worst kind." According to Carter, it was well known that Whathall had been living with these low white women, but she had also heard that Whathall could not get rid of them to save his life. Black women could also seek revenge in such matters. In Virginia in 1868, when a black man left his black wife to live with the white woman, the wife assaulted the white woman for having stolen the affections of her husband. Okay. Even back then, brothers had girls fighting over them. Your baby mama just beat up your pog. I'm sorry, this is bad. I shouldn't be laughing about that. I shouldn't be laughing, but that's just funny. I mean, come on now. You have to find some humor in the darkness, right? Anyway, so talk of party politics also entered into discussions of bad white women, and again, the congressional investigators participated. A dialogue with a white North Carolina man illustrates the intertwining of the moral reputations and political leanings of white women. Here's the question. Were the women whipped because they were Republicans? Answer. That I cannot answer. I can only make the statements that in every instance, question. You said they were women of low character. Answer. Some of them were, others were of good character. Question. The most of them were women of low character? Answer. Yes, sir. Question. What do you mean by women of low character? Answer. I mean base women. Question. Do you mean strumpets and unchaste women? Answer. Yes, sir. Of course, women have been whipped who are not of that character. Question. I understand you to say that men were whipped at the same time. Answer. I said this, that when women were whipped, the men who lived at the place were Republicans. They have whipped one woman where there was no man at all. Question. That was a woman of bad character? Answer. Yes, sir. So we have to remember, right? Like, sexism in this case is not, lost as well, classism as well. So basically, these poor white women in the South were victims of, high levels of violence from white men who were seeking to enforce patriarchy at any length, by any means necessary. So, a former North Carolina Klansman likewise testified that a white widow had been harassed because she believed with the Radical Party, and at the same time had been accused of having black men lying around there and staying. Alabama Klansman whipped a white woman, a loose character, because it was thought she wasn't keeping a nice house. The committee then asked whether the woman was a radical, a Union woman. In Georgia, Klansmen assaulted a white woman for boarding a white Republican at her home. Her enemies threw rocks at the woman's son, and when she tried to protect him, taunted her with the words, "Well, supposing we do kill him, there will be one radical less to grow up." For Klansmen and their supporters, then only certain white women merited the supposed benefits of male protection. There were few accusations of the rape of white women who did not qualify as ladies. And just as in the antebellum South, when poor white women consorted with black men, their actions only proved their degradation. Transgressing white women like Polly Lane, Doretha Bourne, and Caroline Hughley had suffered gossip, persecution, and ostracism in the slave South, but none had suffered extreme violence outside the bounds of their families. Beginning in the years after the Civil War, white women who consorted with black men were subject to whipping, maiming, and murder by the KKK. Moreover, in the post-emancipation South, the supposed sexual immorality of transgressing white women could be linked to party politics through the activism of the men with whom they may have kept company. For Klansmen, transgressing white women, too, were potentially threatening to white men's quest to retain their power in the face of political and economic advances being made by free people. As in the antebellum South, some of these white women defied the patriarchal tenet that their sexuality was the exclusive property of white men. As serious a trespass as that had been in the slave South, such defiance now became grounds for organized, retributive, physical atrocities. With slavery demolished, fault lines in the racial and gender hierarchies had to be repaired and then guarded. In this endeavor by white Southerners came the terrorization of black men and some of the white women who consorted with them. I've said this before, I'll say it again right now. If a woman were to say to me, generally all men want to do harm to women, I would not disagree. And in fact, the more I think about it, I tend to think it's true. All men want to do harm to women in the sense that they want to maintain power. And when we add on the intersections of race and class as well, white male patriarchy is one of the most violent forms of domination that exists, right? And what we're seeing here is that white men were committing all this violence against black men and white women for spurious reasons, essentially to maintain a power structure that was slowly dissipating, right? Black men were no longer explicitly in chains. We're still far away from the women's movement, but just having free black men puts white men in contention and in competition with black men, causing them to lash out and overreact in these ways violently. So yeah, patriarchy is bad. Patriarchy is bad. Masculinity essentially is bad. Man, the more I start to read, maybe the more I start to really dislike being a man. The more I start to read, the more I really dislike being a man or the social construct of a man. I start to really find myself questioning manhood in the sense that I don't find it to be something to be lauded or loved or cherished or to be celebrated, right? I don't find myself, poking my chest out saying I'm glad to be a man or a strong black man. It's, you know what I mean? And in this story, right, we're reading about the transgressions mostly of like white men who are doing heinous, horrific things to people, right? But still, there are some, we're not going to take black men off of the hook either, right? I mean, my wife and I reviewed that film earlier this year, Desert Rose, where black men in Africa are committing female genital mutilation on women to maintain their version of male patriarchy and power. I find this disgusting, right? All right. Anyway, Acti says, now that's hot. Come here. Okay. It's funny. I said, I don't care about being a man. And my wife says, well, come here, trans boy. I would never be trans. I would never be trans. But let's continue here. And by the way, I'm not transphobic, by the way. Some people have told me, oh, Simon, you're so homophobic. You're so transphobic. No. They just like to make jokes sometimes. But let's continue here. So, the sexualization of Reconstruction politics. The issue of sex between black men and white women held a significant place in the formal political debates of Reconstruction. After emancipation, freedmen and freed women expressed their newly won status in multiple ways. They chose new names and daily refused to defer to whites. They established schools and independent churches. They sought to control their own labor. They demanded their own land. Within families, freedmen assumed authoritative roles that had been difficult or impossible to fulfill under the domination of white slaveholders, and some freed women withdrew from labor outside their homes, at least for a brief period. And beginning with radical Reconstruction directed by the Republican Party in 1867, black men registered to vote, held public office. Where was I? Sorry, I got a text real quick. Black men registered to vote, held public office, and participated in political meetings, rallies, debates, and protests. Black women also wielded significant political influence within their communities. To white people, black male suffrage was the most galling of all seizures of power. For black men, suffrage was the most radical and radicalizing departure from their former status as slaves. As one black man put it in 1869, the loss of suffrage would be equal to the loss of freedom. Let's remember that for all the people that say it's not important to vote, which is unfortunately a lot. The loss of suffrage would be equal to the loss of freedom. Not exercising your democratic rights to participate in politics or vote is a loss of freedom. All right. Anyway, Acti says we love men who acknowledge toxic masculinity to men that's attractive. Well, Acti, tell that. Let's put that message out there. Don't delete that. All the guys read that message right there. Toxic masculinity, patriarchy, manhood, as it's understood. It's not attractive. It's not what we want in 2025. All right, let's continue here. Throughout Reconstruction, black men continue to connect civil and politics rights. Throughout Reconstruction, black men continue to connect civil and political rights to ideas about manhood. I believe that's a typo right here because this doesn't make sense. Political rights, not politics rights. Anyway, when the minister Henry McNeil Turner was barred from his seat in the Georgia state legislature on the grounds of race in 1868, he intoned, "I am here to demand my rights and to hurl thunderbolts at the men who would dare to cross the threshold of my manhood." Directly linking manhood with political rights, Turner asked, "Am I a man? If I am such, I claim the rights of a man. I want to convince the House today that I am entitled to my seat here." Turner reinforced this point with the warning that if tomorrow a war should arise, I would not to raise a musket to defend a country where my manhood is denied. Joseph H. Rainey, congressman from South Carolina, also unmasked the connection between political rights and black manhood in a congressional debate of 1873. Southern white men, Rainey declared, wished to withhold citizenship from the black men, from the black man. Because such actions as suffrage had a tendency to make him feel his manhood, which in the eyes of white men was asking too much, Rainey observed. Just as soon as we begin to assert our manhood and demand our rights, we become objectionable, we become obnoxious, and we hear this howl about social equality. Alabama Congressman James T. Rapier likewise equated manhood with the right to vote, announcing in 1874 that nothing short of a complete acknowledgement of my manhood will satisfy me. The Southern state by the way, it should also be remembered at this time that manhood and voting were sort of hand in hand because only men could vote, right? Women were still not allowed to vote. Black men had the right to vote. I think also property rights weren't even a part of the deal back then anymore, right? Because the country was founded, only white male property owners could vote in elections. So yeah, that's why they're saying like manhood and voting are hand in hand at this time. But let's continue. The Southern state constitutional conventions held between 1867 and 1869 uniformly provided civil and political rights for black men. Yet what Rainey referred to as social equality was a point of contention among delegates, many of whom were Southern white Republicans. Social equality was a nebulous term referring largely to integration. Mingling with black people was often acceptable to white people where only one sex prevailed. Black and white women could cook in the same kitchen, and so black and white women could cook in the same kitchen, and black and white men could drink at the same bar. Arenas frequently frequented by both sexes, such as schools and streetcars by contrast, were thought by whites to be dangerous to white girls and women. To some white Southerners, then, social equality meant fostering conditions that would lead to sex between black men and white women. Some white Southerners thus understood political rights as a certain prelude to sexual intimacy. In Virginia, just after the war, a white man debating Negro suffrage fretted that black men would vote themselves white wives. Sir, I'm here to cast my ballot for my pog. The Negroes are going to vote themselves marrying into white women. That's hilarious. That's funny. Anyway, uh, a Richmond newspaper likewise mixed politics and sex when criticizing the Republican State Convention of 1867, in which black delegates outnumbered whites and thousands of freed people attended, noting that sympathetic whites would rather miscegenate than democratize. Oh, that's funny. The North Carolina Constitution of 1868 included one resolution stating all at once that intermarriages and illegal intercourse between the races should be discountenanced, and the interest and the happiness of the two races will be best promoted by the establishment of separate schools. Dialogue about politics and sex begun in the halls of the federal government during the Civil War, thus continued into the Reconstruction years. Recall that white wartime politicians have brought fears of sex between black men and white women into congressional debates about black rights now again. According to an Arkansas Democrat in 1868, to give a black man the vote meant that he would be taken into the parlors of all that vote for him, to marry their daughters, and if necessary, hug their wives. In the same year, a Northern whites Republican asked if those who professed such fears would feel obliged to arrange a social visit because your ballot and theirs had been mingled in the same box. And he elaborated, should your ballot and that of a black man happen to be placed in juxtaposition, did that mean you had to give your daughters in marriage to the American citizen of African descent? In 1875, in Mississippi, a book entitled Sister Sally warned white Southerners that their own wretchedness would be final with the marriage of their sisters, their own dear sister Sally, to a buck Negro. A white Northerner commenting on the book felt that it was impossible not to see in all these preparations a settled purpose on the parts of white Southerners to take possession of the government by force if necessary. I have to say this, man. This goes deep. You know, I've said this before in previous live streams, but I always say that what people find the most sexually arousing is what they usually in public would say is the most disgusting thing, right? And I do think there is some deep part of the brain of the oppressing class that says that essentially they feel guilty for what they've done. And so they're saying all these things as, isn't it so disgusting that possibly, you know, Negroes could marry our daughters, our wives, our you know, et cetera, when secretly it seems like this is what they fetishize. Now, if we go today to what we see on the Hub and other tube sites where people are watching pornography, you'll find that under certain sections of, you know, interracial pornography, there is a type of political angle to it. You know, there are videos and images out there where people are implying that white people who protest for Black Lives Matter or who voted for Kamala Harris or who walk around with an Obama t-shirt secretly want to, you know, suck on BBC is essentially what you will find out there, right? This is a part of the, you know, the anthology, the lexicon of pornography today, if you go that deep into it, right? And it's not that hard to find. And I'm not encouraging people to go into it, but it seems like it is not. Once again, the more things change, the more they stay the same. History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. And there is still this sexual anxiety that seems to be in the minds of the white Southern racist in regards to the black man's genitalia, which they cannot seem to not think about. They said, you know, if you're voting with a black man, don't you think the black man also wants your wife too? Like, what? What? Come on now, have some sense. Anyway, let's continue here. It was the equation of political rights and black manhood that became so central to Reconstruction conflicts. The idea of manhood, which had long implied the rights and responsibilities of citizenship in American political thought, now assumed connotations in white minds of black men engaging in sex with white women. Black spokesmen in turn perceived the connection in white minds. One black writer noted in 1866 that the cry is loud and long when there is a prospect. through the agency of newborn freedom of a man with a dark skin leading to the altar a woman with a white skin, adding that the white man seems to be afraid that some of his daughters may do what a good many of his sons and himself has done time and again. Henry McNeill Turner challenged the notion that free black men desired marriage to white women. That was another foolish dream, Turner scoffed, asking, what do we want with their daughters and sisters? He added, perhaps ominously to white ears, all we ask of the white man is let our ladies alone and they need not fear us. Black protesters not only challenged white fears of marriage between black men and white women, but also confronted white Southerners about their articulated fears of rape. One colored citizen from Georgia reminded white men in 1866 that during the war, black men not only protected their wives and children, but tilled their fields and fed their armies, pointedly asking, did we at any time rise against their helpless families? Ladies of Georgia, can you now fear us who were courteous to you while your husband, father, and brother were absent? Is it not ungenerous now to manifest such distrust simply because we are free? At the Arkansas Constitutional Convention in 1868, Black delegate James T. White similarly pointed out, in the late bloody war, these gentlemen left their wives and daughters in the care of colored men for 4 years, and I defy the gentlemen to cite me a single instance where they have failed to live up to their integrity. Black protesters would continue to invoke their arguments to the end of the century. Grand Wizard Forrest claimed that his organization had no political purpose, and the Democratic members of the Congressional Committee agreed, denying any political significance to the violence. Of course, politics could be defined narrowly, as it was in the mind of a white Northern Carolinian who assessed a Klan attack by saying, I suppose this grew out of some prejudice against the race, not out of politics. Those who took a broader view, however, linked Klan assaults for sexual misconduct to Reconstruction politics, whether that misconduct was fabricated, rumored, or real. A lawyer who renounced his membership in the North Carolina Klan readily acknowledged connection between political and sexual transgressions. In a great many instances where Negroes were whipped, this man said they had been accused of, among other things, insults to white ladies. As for the truth of such charges, no one bothered to find out. Because violence had the effect to intimidate a number of Negroes into voting the Democratic ticket, and also preventing a number from voting at all. Likewise, in Alabama, a mob of Klansmen fired into a black settlement, supposedly because there was a Negro man living in marital relation with a woman thought to be of the white race. But one witness averred that it was only a pretext for maltreating the colored people and the determination of driving them away. Others seem to have been less conscious of the links they made between politics and sex. A white lawyer from North Carolina described the Klan to his diary as a political society based on the supremacy of the white race. That seemed to abhor miscegenation and to protect female virtue from Negro violence or his embraces. Witnesses also offered theoretical interpretations about politics and sex, and these mirrored the social equality debates taking place in Congress. When the investigating committee asked a North Carolina Klansman about the purpose of the organization, he said it was to keep down the coloredens from mixing with the whites. And by what means would this be accomplished? To keep them from marrying and to keep them from voting, he answered. Another white North Carolina man said, the common white people of the country are at times very much enraged against the Negro population. They think that this universal political and civil equality will finally bring about social equality, adding, there are already instances in which poor white girls are having Negro children. A white postmaster in Mississippi thought whites believed that putting colored men into office in positions of prominence will gradually lead them to demand social equality and to intermingle by marriage with the whites. A white lawyer in Mississippi thought poor whites were induced to believe that the Republicanism means social equality, that if a man is a Republican, he must necessarily be in favor of white people and Negroes marrying and associating on terms of perfect equality in the social circle. As a white tax collector in Georgia explained, white Southerners take the question of equality in its broadest sense. That is, if you talk about equality, they at once conclude that they must take the Negro into your parlor and into your bed. He added, it is a very unfortunate thing to have mixed up in politics. Very interesting what they're saying here. I mean, essentially, the fear of genetic annihilation As Dr. Francis Cress Welsing says, the fear of genetic annihilation undergirds white supremacy. When, at the time of Reconstruction, at the end of slavery, the people who were joining the Klan were essentially saying we weren't as scared of Negroes voting as we were scared of them having sex with our daughters and producing more Negro mulatto children and stuff like that. The fear of genetic annihilation undergirds white supremacy. Let's continue here in the text. A British traveler to the Reconstruction South wrote of the lynching of black men accused of raping a white woman and relayed that an experienced judge told me he had known many accused and many hanged, but none convicted on trial. The writer astutely included these observations under the heading, The Political Situation in the South. Members of the Congressional Committee also chose sides on the links between Klan violence, sex, and politics. One Democratic interviewer offered a white witness the following hypothetical scenario, presumably in an effort to deflate the idea that murder for alleged rape was in any sense a political act. Well, sir, he said, suppose that a man were killed in your town today, and it were known that he were killed by 10 Republicans, and that the man happened to be a Democrat, and had been guilty of rape upon the wife of one of those Republicans, and he should be killed whilst being conveyed to jail. Would you say that was political? On the other side, a Republican committee member tried to get a white witness to admit that politics did indeed play a role in casting aspersions upon Northerners. Do you know a single Northern person, male or female, who has come down into this country and taken an interest in your political affairs, who has not suffered in character, who has not been maligned? He asked. Has not some fault been found with their personal character invariably? In 1871, Robert Elliott, a black representative from South Carolina, spoke for nearly every Southern state when he described Klansmen as seeking revenge for political power lost and all their violence toward black men. The volatile intertwining of sex and politics in the Reconstruction South brought in its wake violence directed at any person who transgressed traditional moral boundaries. In spite of their own violent actions, sexual and otherwise, Klansmen in the Reconstruction South took upon themselves the monitoring of sexual conduct beyond transgressions between black men and white women. A white man whose politics were in accord with the Klan was likely to be left alone if he engaged in a liaison with a black woman. Indeed, some Klansmen themselves sought black mistresses. In Georgia, for example, a white witness thought that black men had frequently been whipped for keeping a mulatto girl that some white man wanted. And yet, Klansmen searched out white men who were their political enemies and whom they purportedly suspected of sexual liaisons with black women. The Klan also targeted those who formed sexual liaisons across the Mason-Dixon line. A white Northerner who worked for the Freedmen's Bureau had his horse disfigured for marrying a Southern woman, and a white Southern woman was whipped for marrying a Union man. There were also numerous Klan offensives for adultery and fornication between whites and between blacks, and charges of wife abuse and child abuse could precipitate Klan violence. One Alabama victim assaulted for cruelty to his wife, for example, was warned to practice more proper in his domestic habits. A North Carolina witness recalled a rare instance in which a Democrat was targeted by the Klan, noting that the attackers were scourging him for being a very dissipated man, for having maltreated his wife, and for having associated with bad persons. And like white women, white men could be described as bad or low, for illicit actions that ranged from running houses of prostitution to having children with black women. Accusations of incest or rumors of abortion could also prompt a Klan attack. Nor did Klansmen confine themselves to strictly sexual or domestic misconduct. Drunkenness or the illegal distilling of liquor could be case or cause for an assault. Thus, while Klansmen committed sexual depredations across the color line and practiced extreme violence on men and women, both black and white, they attempted a retrenchment of authority on the part of Southern white men, assuming the role of sexual and moral arbiters and taking it upon themselves to police all conduct in the post-emancipation South. That Klansmen, on their rampages, sometimes dressed in frocks that resembled women's clothing, prompted one investigator to remark, "They seem to have a nice sense of morality, these gentlemen who wear this particular dress." Moreover, all of these moral transgressions, not only liaisons between black men and white women, were bound up with politics and dialogues about Klan violence. A white man in Georgia, when asked why a particular mulatto man was whipped, said, "I heard some people allege that that there was a feeling against Colby for living with a near relative of his. I think his daughter as his wife. Did he mean incest? Yes, sir. The witness answered. I heard that alleged against him. I also heard other people, white men, say that there was nothing against Colby except his politics. Both of these things were stated to me. So, once again, history seems to rhyme. And one thing that I've noticed amongst the white supremacists is that some of the people, like the Proud Boys, they have white wives or Asian wives. You'll notice a lot of the white supremacists take women of other ethnic groups, right? That I think it's partially because white women don't want to deal with them, and they're only able to flex their white privilege in other countries to get women to bow to them. That's one thing. A second thing that we notice amongst the white supremacists is that a lot of them have sick sexual ways. I mean, sleeping with your own daughter and stuff like that. Incest seems to be prevalent amongst them. Only go to 4chan to know. Look on 4chan, you'll find all sorts of sick, twisted things that the whites are saying amongst themselves, and the white supremacists explicitly. So, history seems to rhyme. And also, the accusations of sexual depravity against the left by the right seems to be a common thing, right? Because what does the right say about any leftist? Oh, they're pedophiles. Oh, they're rapists. Or they're this, that, and the third, right? They were doing the same thing then. They were lynching people back then because of their politics, because they were Republicans, which were the left back then, right? Let's continue here. The conflation of sex in politics, the terrorization of Black men, the abuse of white women, and the violent condemnation of any behavior deemed morally transgressive, these were interlocking elements in the broader sexualization of politics in the Reconstruction South. Every form of power exercised by freedmen meant a parallel loss of power for white men. That included newfound authority over Black women in the domestic sphere, as well as any invented or observed agency or aggression in relation to white women, whether in the form of marriage, cohabitation, fornication, adultery, familiarity, brazenness, harassment, sexual assault, or rape. But Klansmen and their sympathizers usually invoked the latter categories, from familiarity to rape, subject to the white woman's class standing and moral reputation. Although the geography of Klan violence during the first half of Reconstruction is difficult to plot with certainty, it is clear that Klansmen worked their violence in areas of the South where whites had previously contended with sex between Black men and white women without such violence. Klan activity in North Carolina, for example, centered in the Piedmont area around Greensboro, just north and west of Davidson County, the home of Polly Lane and Jim. Rowan County, out of which Davidson had been carved in 1822, was also the scene of Klan violence by the early 1870s. In Georgia, Burke County experienced terrible violence against voting freedmen. This had been the home of the Nunez family, and it was here that Klansmen shot a Black man for living with a white woman and beat the woman so severely that she could not sit up yesterday. It was also in Burke County that whites burned 3 Black men and 3 white women alive for cohabiting. A white man from Augusta also recalled an open and notorious case of adultery between a Black man and a white woman in the Burke County line that outraged the community very much. Both were arrested, with neighbors paying for a lawyer to prosecute them. Chattooga County in northwest Georgia was also the venue of tremendous Klan violence a little more than 10 years after the Hugleys moved there to escape the gossip about Caroline's probable adulterous affair with a Black man. The murder of Jordan Ware took place just south of Chattooga in Floyd County. These and numerous other counties in which whites had once confronted sex between Black men and white women with a measure of toleration, or had treated rape charges without lethal harm, became areas of tremendous Klan violence after the Civil War. Virginia, though largely free of the Klan, was by no means exempt from white violence during Reconstruction. In 1866, a Northern teacher in the Tidewater recorded that the Ku Klux Klan have been our neighborhood. The KKK have been in our neighborhood, and we have received a notice that they intend giving us a call. She heard they had a desire to frighten the Negroes from voting the Republican ticket, and that they committed acts of violence to this end. Ultimately, the Klan offered white Southerners a new language of sexualized politics. This language moved away from the whites-only Democratic and Republican rhetoric that had just terrified the coexistence of Black slavery and white liberty in the antebellum South to issue ominous warnings about the political and sexual perils of racial equality in the post-war South. Speaking before the Congressional Committee, a white Republican whose father had been a slave owner put it this way about the Negro. When he was a slave, they looked upon him as a chattel. Now they look upon him as something worse than a chattel, more like a bad animal that they must fear. So, once again, we're seeing that a lot of this is very reminiscent or, parallels what's happening today in American politics, right? When the right is talking about our country is being invaded. We have people coming here to take what we have. We're going to not be taken advantage of anymore. Under the surface, we see those same sorts of dog whistles, that same sort of rhetoric that powered the Klan. Basically, this sexual politics, basically saying like, we don't want white women ravaged by these newly freed black men that are running around. It sounds very similar to, Trump saying like, the Mexicans, they're coming, they're selling drugs, they're rapists, et cetera, et cetera. It's no different. Like, we're seeing the same sort of politics play out from the right today in their rhetoric. Let's continue. So we're finishing up the chapter right here. Klan victims had no effective legal recourse until as late as 1871. Anti-Klan laws passed by state governments proved nearly impossible to enforce, though the use of military power was slightly more effective. On the national level, President Ulysses S. Grant's determination to control the Klan from 1868, the year in which the violence reached its pinnacle, did not succeed in arrests and convictions until 1871. By the national election of 1872, the state governments of Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Georgia, and briefly Alabama, had been returned to Democratic rule, or in the language of white Southerners who despised both black and white Republicans, had been redeemed. Now white Southerners in the remaining Republican-controlled states began to change their tactics, moving away from the undercover attacks on individuals and towards violence openly sanctioned by the Democratic Party, with the specific aim of winning elections. Although a great many undeterred freedmen continued to vote Republican, the Democratic Party brought good numbers of new white voters to the polls. The Klan had been broken as an undercover organization, but the violence perpetrated from the end of the Civil War until 1871 had played at least some part in the ultimate demise of Reconstruction. With or without the KKK, such violence escalated at the end of the century approached. As the end of the century approached. Throughout the South, the end of racial slavery spelled the end of a secure racial hierarchy for white people. At least some idealistic black people believed that the demise of slavery would mean the demise of racial distinctions. Or as a black teacher wrote in his diary in 1868, I heard a white man say today is the black man's day. Tomorrow will be the white man's. I thought, poor man, those days of distinction between colors is about over in this now free country. Boy, was he wrong. Boy, he said that in 1868. He thought, man, all that color stuff, all that racism, this was in 1868. We have to remember, right? I'll never forget. I forgot where I saw this or read this, but I know it exists out there. And maybe somebody can point me in this direction. At the end of the Civil War, right? About 5 or 10 years after the end of the Civil War, white people then were already saying, like, let's just forget about slavery. That was a long time ago. Only a decade after the end of slavery, they were saying this type of stuff, right? And people back then were saying, oh, after a generation or two, all that racism stuff will phase out. No. We have to remember, young white men are getting turned up and they're becoming even more radical and even more racist. We are not forgetting that. We have Peyton Gentrins running around. We have Dylan Roofs running around. And we have a whole new generation of young white men that are ready to murder black people, right? And racism is not going away anytime soon, or specifically anti-blackness. Let's continue here. So in 1872, when a black minister was asked how many white men were members of a Florida organization in support of freed people, he declined to answer, saying, "We do not count noses, black or white. We take men." The white interviewer persisted, "I am asking you a fact. Men are white or colored, one of the two. Some of them are pretty well mixed," and reiterated, "How many men of the white race are members of this organization?" With a measure of defiance. The minister replied, "I cannot tell." But white people needed to tell and could not have disagreed more with the idea that black and whites were all one color now. All right. After the war, in order to preserve racial hierarchy, whites set out to fashion a more rigid dividing line based upon stricter racial categories. One of the most certain ways to sustain the racial categories of black and white was to make sure that people of African ancestry and people of European ancestry did not have children together. Of course, white men have been largely responsible for the mixture of European and African ancestry throughout the era of slavery, and their power of sexual coercion had stemmed precisely from their political, economic, and social authority in Southern society. With emancipation, black men now possessed a measure of power that white people feared might include access to white women, and white Southern men and women conflated that power with a newly alarmist set of ideas about sex between black men and white women. Armed with such ideology, they hoped to halt the disintegration of their racial caste system, as well as any political, economic, and social authority within communities of freed people. In the antebellum South, the children that had resulted from illicit sex between black men and white women had spurred white neighbors to action. And in the post-bellum South, reproduction mattered too. But the intertwining of power and sex, social equality, was also very much at the center of whites' concerns. Whether whites truly believed that black male suffrage would inevitably mean sex between black men and white women is difficult to determine. In the world of the slave South, voting had connoted manhood and citizenship, which in turn had represented patriarchal power. The power entailed control by white men over black men and women, as well as over white women. And extra legal control in the form of lethal violence now seemed the only way to retain that power. White men may have been the major actors in such violence, but white women would become their partners and accomplices as the century drew to a close. The ramifications of the sexualization of Reconstruction politics would be fully realized toward the end of the century, when the conflation of politics and sex transformed into the conflation of politics and rape. When lynching reached its height in the 1890s, white apologists invariably invoked the rape of white women as justification for extra-legal execution. As the post-Reconstruction era began, white people more and more often named the political rights of black men as catalysts to the rape of white women. And that's the end of chapter 7. We're going to be reading chapter 8, possibly tomorrow, Murder, black men, white women, and lynching. This is where the story gets dark. If it wasn't dark before, it was probably very dark before. But this has been an interesting read. Really enjoyed this book. I hope y'all are enjoying it too. We're gonna wrap up this live stream right now. So let me give a shout out to everybody that jumped up in here. Let's shout out Acti. Let's shout out Juanita Mosby and Brian C. If you have a book that you want me to read, let me know. Put it in the comments. Put it in the chat. And we will try to jump to it and read it live for everybody out here. And when I look at the comments right here, we have some James Baldwin. Okay, 7 votes right now. We got some James Baldwin. I would love to read some James Baldwin. I think I've only read Fire Next Time, if I remember right. And I'll be honest, I probably didn't complete it. It was probably for high school, and I didn't even complete it. So it ain't that bad. But see, it's never too late to learn. So hope y'all enjoyed this reading. Y'all be easy out there, and